I don't know what hit me first, the disbelief or the anger. One minute, I was sitting at the kitchen table, just trying to get through the morning routine, and the next, I was holding my wife's phone in my hand, staring at the messages that shattered everything. It was like the ground dropped out from under me. I was checking the phone because it had been sitting there for a while, buzzing with notifications, and I was just curious. I've never been the jealous type, never felt the need to invade her privacy, but something felt off recently. She'd been acting distant, always busy with work or whatever excuse she could come up with. She stopped looking at me the way she used to, like I wasn't enough. I noticed it, but I brushed it off. Life gets busy, right? Anyway, there it was. The text messages, plain as day. And it wasn't even hidden that well. Just sitting there like they were meant to be found. Her friend, her coworker, texting her late at night, sending sweet nothings, talking about how much they missed each other and how special their time together was. I froze. Couldn't breathe. I just kept reading, scrolling down the thread, feeling my heart sink lower with each word. My wife, the woman I'd given everything to, the one I thought I could trust, was having an affair. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't even know how long it had been going on. Days, weeks, months. I couldn't tell, but the messages were clear. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was ongoing. A betrayal that had been hiding in plain sight for who knows how long. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. I just sat there, numb, feeling like an idiot. I didn't even know where to start. Part of me still couldn't believe it. Maybe this was all some mistake? Maybe I misunderstood something? But deep down, I knew I hadn't. The evidence was right there. I didn't even want to confront her immediately. I just sat in the silence, feeling everything, anger, disbelief, hurt, confusion, wash over me in waves. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't even move. That was the first moment I knew. Everything had changed. I was never going to look at her the same again. And I wasn't sure I even wanted to. The days after I found out were a blur. It felt like I was walking through life with everything muffled, like I was stuck in a fog. There was no real clarity anymore. My world had cracked open, and all the pieces I thought were solid, my marriage, my trust, my self-worth, were just shattered. She knew something was wrong the second she walked in the door that night. I didn't even have to say a word. She could tell by the look on my face. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I was numb, detached. Almost like I was looking at her from the outside, seeing her as some stranger I used to know. She tried to play it off, asking what was going on, why I was so quiet. I didn't respond right away. I didn't even know what to say. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how ridiculous it was. How much I had been blind. I'd ignored all the signs, all the little things that added up. The late nights, the excuses, the way she'd become so secretive with her phone. I had known deep down. But I didn't want to face it. Instead, I just let the silence sit there, thick and heavy. It was suffocating. And I could tell she felt it. She kept glancing at me, like she wanted me to say something, anything. But I didn't. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Not this time. She tried to cover it up at first. "What's wrong?" she asked again, a little more anxious this time. She was playing it cool, trying to act like nothing was happening. I could see right through it. I didn't need her to say anything. I already knew what she'd done. I already knew about her affair. She could lie to me all she wanted, but there was no hiding it. I saw the way she fumbled with her words, trying to explain herself, but the truth was there, hanging between us like an elephant in the room. And she couldn't escape it. At some point, I realized there was no use pretending anymore. I had to confront it head-on, but I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. Not yet. So, I just walked away, not even looking back. She called after me, asking where I was going, what was going on. But I didn't answer. I didn't owe her an explanation. Not then. I went for a long walk that night. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. I just needed space, away from her, away from everything. I felt like I couldn't breathe in that house anymore, like everything in there had become toxic. And honestly, I didn't know how to be around her after that. How could I? How could I look at her the same way when everything I thought I knew about her was a lie? When everything I had trusted her with, my life, my heart, my future, had been thrown away for someone else. I don't even remember how long I walked, but when I finally came back, the house was quiet. She was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, not really watching anything. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but I knew she wasn't going to give it to me. Not now. She had a way of twisting things, making everything sound like it wasn't her fault. She would apologize, but it would be empty, full of excuses. She would cry, maybe. She always knew how to cry when she needed to. But I didn't need her tears. I didn't need her words. I needed the truth, and I was done asking for it. The next few days were hell. She tried to act normal, like nothing had changed, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And me. I was drowning in anger, confusion, and that sharp, hollow feeling that comes with knowing your world has just imploded. I hated her for doing this to me, for doing this to us. But more than that, I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. For letting her get away with it. And then there were the other layers of this whole mess that I wasn't ready for. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything, the people in my life, my friends, my family, how they would look at me now that they knew what had happened. I didn't want to tell anyone, not yet. I wasn't ready to share the shame of it. But I knew it would come out. It always does. People talk. They whisper. And I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be able to keep this bottled up forever. Not when everyone I knew would look at me and wonder how I could have been so blind. But the worst part was how she started acting after all of this. She'd apologize, sure. She'd say how sorry she was, but it felt so empty. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't the kind of guilt that comes from truly being sorry. It was the kind of guilt that comes from getting caught. And then, when I didn't immediately fall into her arms, she got defensive. She started blaming me, saying I wasn't around enough, that I was too busy with work, that I had changed over the years. And that was when I realized just how far gone she was. She was trying to shift the blame. Trying to make it my fault somehow. That's when the resentment started to creep in. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was disgusted. Disgusted by her, by everything she had turned into. And it wasn't just about what she'd done. It was about how she was handling it. How she thought she could lie, deflect, and manipulate me into forgiving her. She had no idea who she was dealing with now. I wasn't going to be the same guy anymore. I couldn't be. The man I had been, the one who trusted her, loved her unconditionally, he was gone. And in his place, a man who was done taking other people's crap. A man who was done being a doormat. The first step toward taking my life back was realizing that I didn't need her. I didn't need her lies or her empty apologies. I didn't need her anymore. It didn't take long for everything to fall apart. The tension in the house was unbearable. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was only about the most mundane, surface-level things. The weather. What we should have for dinner. It was like we were living in two different worlds under the same roof. I was trying to survive in mine while she clung to whatever illusion of a life she had left. I didn't want to see her face, but I couldn't escape her, not really. We still shared the same bed, but it wasn't the same anymore. Sleeping next to her felt like a betrayal to myself. I would lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until I could fall asleep, hoping that the next day would somehow feel different. But it never did. She kept trying to be affectionate, like she thought things could just go back to normal. She'd brush my arm lightly or make some small, half-hearted attempt to kiss me, but it felt so forced. I could tell she was struggling to hold on to something, anything, to make me think that we could fix this. But there was no fixing it. Not after what she'd done. Not after how she'd torn me apart and lied to my face. One night, she asked me if I was going to leave her. She was looking at me with that same pleading look she had when she knew she was losing control. She wanted me to tell her that we could work it out, that we could get through this, that we'd somehow make it all okay again. But how could I say that? How could I give her any kind of hope when all I felt was disgust? It was in that moment that I realized something. I wasn't just angry anymore. I wasn't just hurt. I was numb to her, to everything about her. And I was starting to hate that numbness because it meant that I didn't care enough to fight for this marriage, to even try to repair it. I didn't care enough to pretend that things could go back to the way they were before she broke my trust. I didn't leave her that night. I wasn't ready for that yet, but the thought crossed my mind more than once. It wasn't just the affair that was breaking me, it was the person she had become. She wasn't the woman I had married. That woman had cared about me, had loved me. This woman? She was a stranger. A few days later, I went through her things. I told myself I wouldn't, but I did. I needed to know how deep this betrayal ran, and I needed to see it all laid out in front of me. I wasn't looking for something to give me closure, but I guess I wanted to be certain that this wasn't just some mistake she'd made. I needed to see the full picture. It wasn't just the texts anymore. I found more. Emails. Photos. It wasn't just one affair, either. She had been sleeping with him for months. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she had been hiding it from me so carefully. All the lies, the excuses, the late nights. She was playing me like a fool. And the anger? It started to boil over then. I felt a kind of rage that I hadn't known I was capable of. But it wasn't the kind of rage that made you want to throw things or scream at someone. It was quieter. More dangerous. It was the kind of rage that made you realize how small and weak someone could make you feel. I wanted to make her feel that. I wanted her to know that I wasn't the man she thought I was. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. But there was also a deeper, darker feeling stirring in me. The anger was a part of it, but there was something else, too. Something that scared me. It wasn't just about punishing her anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about feeling like I could stand up again, even if that meant tearing everything down in the process. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know who I could trust. But what I did know was that I wasn't going to stay in that place of weakness. I wasn't going to let this, define me any longer. The resentment was growing now, and I didn't try to hide it. I didn't pretend anymore. Every time she touched me, every time she looked at me with those fake, apologetic eyes, it made my skin crawl. She had taken so much from me. She had taken my trust, my sense of security, my belief that I could count on her. But she wasn't going to take my dignity. Not anymore. I started to distance myself, emotionally and physically. I stopped trying to engage with her. I couldn't be in the same room without feeling the urge to scream at her or walk out. Every day felt like a battle, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. Not entirely. I wasn't sure what I was fighting for anymore, but I knew I had to keep going. I needed to find out what I was truly capable of. But I also knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. There was only so much I could take before I had to make a decision. I couldn't live in that limbo anymore. The constant tension, the silent judgment, the lie of, maybe things will get better. It was wearing me down, so I started making plans. Not big ones, nothing that would make her suspicious, but little things. I started looking into getting my own place. I started setting aside money. I started thinking about how to build a life outside of her. I knew that the moment I fully let go of the idea of saving this marriage, I'd be free. But I wasn't there yet. I was still caught between the man I used to be and the man I was becoming. And the hardest part? I didn't know if I even wanted to forgive her anymore. There were days when I thought maybe I could forgive her. Not for what she did, but for the person she used to be. I'd remember the woman I'd married, the one who laughed with me over stupid jokes, the one who used to hold my hand like she actually wanted to be with me, the one who wasn't afraid to talk about the future. I'd tell myself that maybe, with time, we could somehow put the pieces back together. Maybe I was just angry, hurt, and needed space to process it all. Maybe, eventually, I'd be able to let go of the resentment and rebuild something. But every time I looked at her, I remembered the truth I couldn't erase. I couldn't forget what she'd done to me, to us. I couldn't forget the lies, the deceit, the way she made me feel like I was invisible in our own life. And every time I remembered that, I knew I couldn't forgive her. Not in the way she wanted me to, anyway. She didn't get it. She kept trying. She kept apologizing, over and over, as if that was going to fix everything. But the words were empty, and I could hear the desperation in her voice, the way she was starting to panic as she saw me slip further away. At first, she thought she could smooth things over with a little kindness. Maybe she'd buy me a coffee, or try to start a casual conversation. But each time, I shut her down. I didn't want to hear it. The more she pushed, the more I recoiled. I could feel the distance between us growing, like an invisible wall I was putting up. It was self-preservation. I stopped caring about what she thought. I stopped caring about her feelings. She had already burned me so badly that I couldn't even pretend like I was still invested in making things work. I didn't want to fix this anymore. And the thing that stung the most? She never seemed to understand why. Every time I got cold with her, she'd act like it was just a phase. "You'll get over it," she'd say. "We'll get past this." But I wasn't so sure anymore. I didn't think we were ever going to get past it. It wasn't just the affair that did it. It was everything. The way she thought she could erase what she'd done with a few words, the way she could lie to me and then act like nothing was wrong. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going to fall for that anymore. It's crazy, but in a way, I felt more alive now than I had in months. Even though I was hurting, even though I was angry, I could finally feel the fire inside me again. I wasn't just someone's doormat. I wasn't someone who would let this kind of thing slide, who would forgive and forget because it was easier. I had more respect for myself than that. She kept trying, but it felt like she was just spinning her wheels. She'd give me some pathetic excuse for why she had done what she did, telling me it was a mistake, or that she was lost, or whatever else she thought would make me understand. But I wasn't buying it. I couldn't. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need her to explain herself anymore. I was done. And then came the part where I realized that, no matter what, I couldn't stay in this house with her. The lies, the anger, the resentment, it was toxic. I couldn't live like that. And the longer I stayed, the more I felt like I was losing myself. I wasn't just losing her. I was losing my sense of who I was. So I started looking into my options. I found a small apartment not too far from where we lived. Just enough distance to get away, but not too far to feel disconnected from everything I knew. It wasn't a big move, but it felt huge. It felt like the first real step I was taking toward something different. Toward getting my life back. The thought of leaving her was still painful, but it was also liberating. I could feel the weight starting to lift off my chest as I realized that I didn't need to stay in this broken relationship. I didn't owe her anything anymore. Not my love, not my loyalty, not even my time. But even as I made plans, even as I started packing up some of my things, there was still that lingering feeling of doubt. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe, just maybe, I should try again. Maybe there was some way to fix this mess. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the guy who would put his head down and pretend that everything was okay. I wasn't the guy who would let his wife walk all over him because he was afraid of being alone. I wasn't weak anymore. And the hardest part about all of this? I wasn't sure I wanted her back, even if she begged for me to stay. There's something eerie about the quiet before a storm, and that's exactly how it felt in the weeks leading up to the final decision. I'd already started to distance myself, emotionally, physically, and even though we were still living under the same roof, it was like we were strangers. The house felt empty, even when it was full of people. I wasn't the same person she had married, and she wasn't the same woman I had loved. The roles we once played so easily had been rewritten without us even realizing it. We'd have these awkward moments where I'd catch her staring at me, like she was trying to read my mind. I'd catch glimpses of what used to be affection in her eyes, but it was all gone now. Her love wasn't genuine anymore. It was just desperation. She needed me to be the man I used to be, but that man was dead. He had died the moment I found out about the affair, and no amount of tears or apologetic speeches could bring him back. There were times when I almost felt sorry for her, but then I'd remember the lies, the sneaking around, the blatant disrespect for me and everything we had built together. I thought about how easy it was for her to throw it all away, like I wasn't even worth fighting for. There were no second chances in my book anymore. I wasn't going to let her off the hook just because she was sorry now. I wasn't going to let her pretend like the damage wasn't done. So I did what I had to do. I gave her the truth. Not some half-hearted attempt at explaining why things weren't working. I didn't sugarcoat it or tell her that maybe we could fix things. I just told her that I was done. I told her I was leaving. At first, she didn't believe it. She thought I was bluffing. She thought if she begged me enough, I'd cave. She tried everything. More apologies, more guilt trips, more promises to change. But none of it worked. The moment I made that decision, I felt a weight lift off me. I felt like I was finally in control. I had power again. It wasn't easy though. I wasn't completely free yet. I hadn't packed up everything or moved out, but the decision had been made. And I stuck to it. The worst part, the part one didn't expect, was how completely devastated she was when I told her. I don't know why I was surprised by her reaction. Maybe I thought she'd seen it coming, but there she was, crying, pleading, asking me to reconsider. And for a second, I almost did. I almost felt that old instinct to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, that we could work through it. But then I remembered everything she had put me through, and I just couldn't. She begged me to stay, told me how much she loved me, how sorry she was. But I didn't feel the same way anymore. I was done pretending that we could go back to the way things were. I wasn't going to let myself be fooled again. And I wasn't going to let her make me feel guilty for needing to move on. I could see it in her face, that realization that this was real. I wasn't just angry anymore. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. She could beg all she wanted, but the truth was, she had lost me. And I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me weak. The days that followed were a blur. It felt like everything I had ever known was slowly being torn down. I packed up my stuff, bit by bit, while she stayed in the other room, silent, trying to give me space. I didn't even want to look at her. I didn't want to hear any more apologies or explanations. I just needed to get out. The hardest part, though, was when I finally left. It was harder than I thought it would be. Leaving wasn't just about walking out the door and never looking back. It was about the life we had built, the plans we had made together. It was about all the things I thought we had, all the things that were supposed to last. And I kept wondering, as I packed my last bag, if I was making a mistake. But then I'd remember the truth, and I knew I wasn't. When I walked out of that door, it wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of who I thought I was. The man who believed in second chances, the man who believed in love and loyalty. That guy was gone. And I wasn't sure who I was anymore. But at least I was free. I took a few deep breaths as I stepped into my car, looking back at the house one last time. It was a strange feeling. I had expected to feel this sense of relief, this weight lifted. And I did, in a way. But there was also a deep emptiness. Like a part of me had died, too. And maybe it had. The part of me that believed in forever. The part that had given everything I had to her. But as I drove away, I realized something. I wasn't empty. I wasn't lost. I was just starting over. And whatever came next, I knew it would be on my terms. The silence in the apartment was deafening. At first, I wasn't sure if I was relieved or just scared out of my mind. I spent the first few nights just sitting there in the middle of the room, staring at the walls, trying to adjust to the fact that this was it. No more pretending. No more "we'll figure it out" moments. No more waiting for a conversation that would somehow make everything right again. It was just me, alone with my thoughts, and they weren't always kind. I'd tell myself that I made the right choice. That I deserved better. That I couldn't keep living like I had been, stuck in a marriage that was nothing but a lie. But even knowing all that, it didn't stop the pangs of doubt that kept creeping in. The mornings were the hardest. Waking up to an empty bed, to the quiet of a place that wasn't really home yet. I kept expecting her to text me, to try to call, but the silence was even more painful. And every time my phone buzzed, I'd check it and brace myself, expecting a message from her, asking me to come back or telling me how much she missed me. But it never came. Instead, I just had to face myself. I hadn't really thought about what it would mean to be on my own. What it would mean to be free from her, but also free from the person I used to be. I wasn't just separating from her. I was separating from everything I thought I knew about myself. The guy who would always put others first, who would take the punches and keep moving forward, because that's what you did when you loved someone. The guy who believed in loyalty, in working through problems instead of running away from them. That guy was gone now. He had to be. And I hated that it took this long for me to realize how far I'd lost myself. The days blurred together. I went through the motions. Getting up, going to work, doing the things I had to do. But there was this undercurrent of tension, like something was constantly pulling at me, reminding me that I wasn't where I wanted to be. That I wasn't who I wanted to be. I wasn't some bitter, angry guy who'd just thrown away his entire life. But I couldn't help it. I was angry, and I was hurt. And I didn't know how to stop feeling that way. I started hitting the gym more, focusing on something physical, something I could control. I ran until my legs burned, lifted until I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just about getting my body back in shape. It was about forcing my mind to focus on something else. For a few hours each day, I could forget about everything else. I could forget about her. About the lies. About how she'd made me feel like I wasn't enough. But then I'd come home, and the silence would hit again. I'd see her face, even though she wasn't there. The memory of her asking me to stay, her voice breaking, her tears. All of it stayed with me. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to feel anything for her. But the truth was, I still cared. I still felt it. The love wasn't gone entirely. It wasn't like a switch you could just flip. What I hated was that I had to remind myself of the reasons I left. It shouldn't have been that hard. I shouldn't have had to convince myself every time that I made the right choice. The worst part, though, was when I ran into people we knew, friends, family. It wasn't often, but when it happened, it was like they were all watching me, waiting for me to crack. They didn't say anything directly, but I could tell. I could see it in their eyes. They knew something was off. They didn't know exactly what, but they knew. My friends were all so sorry, man, and they'd give me that look. The one that says they don't really know what to say, but they feel like they have to say something. Everyone felt sorry for me. They didn't know the full story. They didn't know how deep the hurt went, how badly I'd been betrayed. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything that led up to it. The lies, the manipulations, the way she made me feel like I wasn't enough. A few people still asked if there was a chance we could work things out, if maybe I could just talk to her. But I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want anyone telling me what I should do. I had made my decision, but it was hard. No one ever tells you how hard it is to redefine yourself after something like this. How hard it is to start over, even when you know you're doing the right thing. I was tired of explaining myself. Tired of hearing, she's not a bad person, she just made a mistake. Maybe. But that didn't change the fact that she destroyed everything. I stopped talking to her family after a while. I couldn't stomach it. They kept asking me to be the bigger person and forgive her, but I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know if I ever would be. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't keep pretending that things were okay. I wasn't going to rush into anything else though. I wasn't ready for a new relationship. I wasn't ready to feel anything for anyone else. I needed to focus on myself. To figure out who I was without her. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I'd catch myself wondering if I'd ever truly move on. Would I ever stop carrying the weight of this betrayal? Would I ever stop seeing her face when I closed my eyes? And even worse, would I ever trust myself again? It was one thing to rebuild a life after someone betrays you, but it was another thing to rebuild the man you used to be. The weeks kept dragging on, and the longer I was away from her, the more I realized that I hadn't just lost her. I had lost a version of myself I didn't even know I was holding on to. I thought leaving would make everything clearer. I thought I'd feel this sense of victory, like I was free from the shackles of her lies and the ghost of our marriage. But the truth was, it didn't feel that way. I kept thinking I would wake up one day and feel like myself again, like I had reclaimed my life. But the process of letting go wasn't linear. Some days were better than others, but even on the good days, there was this gnawing sense of something missing. Something I couldn't quite name, but something that was there, eating at me. I spent more time alone than I cared to admit. Not just in the apartment, but in my own head. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together everything that had happened. The affair, the lies, the betrayal, it all kept running through my mind, like a broken record I couldn't turn off. I kept replaying the moments when I first found out. Her face when I confronted her, the excuses she came up with, the tears that meant nothing to me now. And then, the quiet acceptance when I told her I was leaving. Like she knew, deep down, that it was the end. But here I was, still haunted by it all. Still angry. Still confused. And maybe that was the thing I didn't expect. The anger that never really went away. I thought the more distance I put between us, the more time would heal everything. I thought the longer I was away, the less I would care. But the truth was, the anger kept coming back in waves. It was like a fire that kept reigniting, every time I thought I'd doused it with enough time, enough space, enough detachment. I wanted to feel justified in my anger. I wanted to feel like I had done the right thing. I wanted the world to see me as the victim, the one who had been wronged. I wanted to feel like I was stronger for walking away, like I had control over my life now. But I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure what strength really looked like in a situation like this. Was it moving on without a second thought? Or was it finally facing the ugly truth that no matter what I did, no matter how many times I told myself I was over her, the hurt would always stay with me? Sometimes, I'd get these flashes of clarity, these brief moments where everything felt okay. I'd find myself smiling at something stupid, like a dumb video on my phone or a song on the radio. For a second, I felt alive again, like I wasn't drowning in all the bitterness. But then it would all come crashing back. And that's when the resentment kicked in. Not just at her but at myself. I realized something after a while. I had been so focused on getting revenge that I hadn't stopped to think about what I really wanted. It wasn't just about punishing her, making her pay for what she did. It was about me, not about her at all. I didn't need to keep fighting this battle, trying to tear her down, trying to prove something. Because, in the end, revenge doesn't fix anything. It doesn't bring back trust. It doesn't bring back the love you once had for someone. I didn't want to be consumed by this anymore. I didn't want to keep waking up every morning with the same bitterness in my gut. I didn't want to let her have that kind of power over me anymore. The anger had its hold on me, but it was becoming a cage. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand it. I started thinking about how I was going to move forward. I knew I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I couldn't keep being angry forever, couldn't keep letting her haunt me like a ghost. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her, not for what she did, but for my own peace of mind. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to stop letting her dictate my life, even from a distance. I couldn't keep measuring my worth by the damage she caused me. There were days when I thought maybe I should talk to her, get some closure. Maybe I'd finally tell her how much she hurt me. Maybe I'd confront her again and tell her that I was still angry, that I didn't care about her apologies anymore, that I didn't want anything to do with her. But the truth was, I didn't need that. I didn't need her to understand my pain to feel validated. And I didn't need her to see me as the one who got away. I needed to see myself as someone who had moved on. So I started to make plans. Not for her, but for me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel like I was just waiting for the next thing to break me. I felt like I had the power to choose what came next. And maybe that was the real revenge. To walk away from the wreckage she left behind, to take back my life and rebuild it the way I saw fit. I wasn't sure what my future held. But for the first time, I felt like I had the strength to face it. Without her. The first few months after I moved out were a blur of conflicting emotions. Some days, I was angry and bitter, like I was still carrying a backpack full of resentment. Other days, I would feel this odd emptiness, like something was missing, and I couldn't quite figure out what. I spent a lot of time alone, which I guess was good in some ways. It forced me to face my feelings without distractions. The truth was, I wasn't really healing the way I thought I would. Everyone talks about how time heals all wounds, but that didn't feel like my experience. Time didn't make the hurt go away. Time just made it harder to remember who I was before it all fell apart. I didn't know how to go back to the guy who trusted people, who believed that love was enough. The longer I stayed away from her, the less I knew about what I even wanted anymore. I didn't want to forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever, but I didn't want to stay angry, either. I didn't realize how much of myself had been wrapped up in her until I started untangling it. I had based so much of my identity on being her husband, on taking care of her, on keeping our life together. Even when I had doubts, even when I could see things slipping away, I didn't want to admit it. I thought I could fix everything. I thought I could love her enough to make her see the value in what we had. But I couldn't. And that was the hardest thing to accept. I couldn't change her. I couldn't fix what was broken, and I had to stop pretending I could. I started making small changes. I started doing things for myself, even if it felt awkward at first. I'd go out with friends more, which felt strange after so long spent in a relationship where everything revolved around her. It wasn't like I had to explain myself to anyone, but there was this underlying awkwardness, like people were tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. It was like they didn't know what to say, and I didn't either. But slowly, the noise started to fade. The pitying looks, the uncomfortable silences, they didn't sting as much. I realized that their opinions didn't matter anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel okay. I didn't need anyone to tell me what the right thing to do was. I started to feel a little more like myself again. One of the first things I did was start seeing a therapist. I know, it sounds cliché, but it helped more than I thought it would. I didn't go in expecting to have my whole world fixed in one session, but I just needed someone to talk to who wasn't going to judge me. I needed to get everything out of my system. Everything I'd been holding in for years, all the hurt, all the betrayal, the things I didn't have the words for. Talking about it helped me understand how much I had lost. Not just her, but myself. I realized that a lot of what I had been going through wasn't just about her cheating. It was about how I had allowed myself to get lost in her life, in her world, and lost sight of my own. The thing is, when you're in a relationship like that, you don't see it happening. You don't realize how much you give up, how much you sacrifice, until everything blows up in your face. But I was starting to get it. I was starting to see where I had let myself be weak, where I had let things go on longer than I should have. I wasn't perfect. I was far from it. I still had moments where I felt that overwhelming rage come back. But those moments were fewer and farther between. I started to get a sense of my own worth again. And then one day, after weeks of avoiding it, I finally deleted her number from my phone. I hadn't realized how much I was holding on to until that moment. I wasn't even sure what I thought would happen if I kept it in there. I wasn't expecting a text from her. God knows I'd ignored enough of them already. But for some reason, seeing her name still on my phone felt like she still had a hold on me. Like I was waiting for her to come back and fix everything. But deleting it? That was different. It felt like a line in the sand, like I was finally taking back control over something I hadn't even realized I'd given up. That was the first time in months I truly felt like I was moving forward. Of course, healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I still couldn't shake the memory of her with him, the image of her lying to me, pretending everything was fine while she was off building a life behind my back. I still wanted answers, even if I didn't know what those answers would do for me. There were still moments when I wondered what could have been, when I caught myself thinking about what we might have had if things had turned out differently. But more and more, I started to understand that it didn't matter. It wasn't about fixing things with her. It wasn't about rewriting our past. It was about learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, how to trust myself again, and how to move forward without being defined by what she had done to me. One of the things I realized was that I'd been waiting for some kind of closure, some big, dramatic moment where everything would make sense. But that's not how this worked. Closure didn't come with some final conversation or some grand gesture. It came from inside me, from the decision to stop letting the past dictate my future. It came from choosing to let go of the anger, the hurt, and the need for revenge. It came from deciding that I was worth more than all the pain she had caused me. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But little by little, I was starting to heal. And I was starting to feel like I might be okay. It's been a while now, and I've finally settled into a routine of sorts. I won't lie and say everything's perfect. It's not. But I'm getting there, day by day. Some days, I actually feel like myself again. Like the guy who's in control of his life, who's got his shit together, and isn't just a shell of who he used to be. But then there are other days, where the old anger comes back. Not even anger, really. More like an ache, a gnawing emptiness. It catches me off guard sometimes, like when I'm sitting in a coffee shop or driving down the street, and I see something that reminds me of her. Maybe it's a couple holding hands, or someone laughing at a joke I used to tell. It's like the world just slaps me in the face and says, "You don't get to be happy yet." I try to brush it off, but there's always this underlying tension, like the past is lurking right behind me, waiting to pull me back in. I've been good about not reaching out to her, and I haven't seen her in months. The last time I did, it was by accident. I was walking out of the grocery store, and there she was, standing at the curb, talking to some guy I didn't recognize. I don't know why that moment hit me like it did. I knew she'd moved on. Hell, I expected it. But seeing it in person made it real, and it felt like a punch to the gut. There was this horrible realization that I didn't matter anymore. She didn't need me. She didn't even care to look back. And even though I didn't want to admit it, part of me still wanted her to care. I wanted her to regret what she did. I wanted her to see how much damage she'd caused. But I didn't let it show. I kept walking, my hands clenched at my sides. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. I kept telling myself, "You've got this. You don't need her." And the truth is, I didn't. I didn't need her. But the sting of that moment stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. Somehow, through all the anger and the pain, I was starting to realize that what I was really upset about wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that I had let someone else define my worth for so long. I had allowed her actions, her lies, her infidelities to make me question who I was. To make me question whether I was good enough. I spent so much time thinking I wasn't enough. But the truth was, I was more than enough. I had always been enough. I just hadn't believed it. And that realization made everything else feel a little lighter. Like maybe I wasn't completely broken after all. Like maybe I could move on without having to destroy the people who hurt me in the process. But moving on, that was the next challenge. A few months after that awkward encounter with her, I started seeing someone else. It wasn't anything serious. Not at first. Just a casual thing. A way to remind myself that I could still connect with people. That I wasn't completely lost. Her name was Kate. She was funny, sharp, and didn't know anything about what had happened with my ex-wife, which, in a way, felt like a blessing. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to justify my past or dredge up old wounds. It was just two people, getting to know each other. But even with Kate, I couldn't shake the fear that I wasn't truly ready for a relationship. Part of me wanted to believe that everything I'd gone through with my ex-wife was behind me. That I could be the guy I was before. Someone who trusted, who loved, who gave without reservation. But I couldn't shake the doubts. What if I was just rushing into this to fill the void? What if I was just trying to avoid the pain of being alone? I didn't want to use Kate. I didn't want her to be my rebound. But I couldn't ignore the fact that I was still guarded, still holding back. I hadn't really learned to be fully vulnerable again. There were things I wanted to tell her, about my marriage, about the affair, about how I felt like I was still in the process of picking up the pieces. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. It felt like if I opened up, I might lose her too. There were nights when I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was too soon to let someone else in. I kept thinking about the way I'd been burned before. How easily trust had been shattered. How easily love had turned to betrayal. And it terrified me. But then there were other nights when I caught myself laughing with Kate, feeling something genuine for the first time in so long. And I'd wonder if I could allow myself to be happy again. If I could allow myself to trust again, without carrying the weight of the past with me. It wasn't that I was afraid of Kate. I didn't think she'd hurt me the way my ex-wife had. But it was the fear that I might hurt her. That I might be carrying too much baggage, too much unresolved pain to give her what she deserved. I couldn't answer that question yet. I didn't know if I was ready. But maybe that was part of the journey. Maybe healing wasn't about being ready at some point in the future. It was about learning to accept the broken pieces of who I was and seeing how they fit together again. One thing was clear. I wasn't going to let the past define me anymore. I wasn't going to let the pain dictate my future. And maybe, just maybe, I could take a chance again. Not on her, not on my ex, but on me. Because I deserved that much. It's been a while now. Not sure exactly how much time has passed. Days blur together when you're caught up in all of this. But I feel different now. Not just different in the sense that I'm still trying to move on from the past, but different in a deeper way. Like I'm finally starting to remember who I am, who I was before I met her. Before all of this. I still think about the betrayal sometimes. The hurt never completely disappears, but I don't let it control me the way it used to. It doesn't get to define me anymore. I'm not that guy, the one who lets someone else's actions tear him apart. Not anymore. It's funny because for so long, I was holding on to the idea of revenge, the idea of making her pay for what she did. I thought that would give me the closure I needed. I thought that if I could somehow hurt her the way she hurt me, I'd feel better. But I never did. I realized, too late, that no amount of revenge could heal the pain she caused. The only thing that could fix me was time, and not just any time, but time spent figuring out who I was now, without her. It's not easy. I still have those moments when I'm reminded of the past, when I hear her name, or see something that pulls me back to the worst of it. But I don't let it drag me down anymore. I don't let it take control of my emotions. One day, I ran into her at the grocery store. She was standing at the checkout, looking just as put together as always, like nothing had ever happened between us. She glanced up and saw me, and I could see the way her eyes flickered for a second. A flash of recognition, maybe a little guilt, but then it was gone. Like it had never been there. For a moment, I wanted to walk up to her and say something. Something about how she wrecked me, about how she ruined everything we had. But then I realized something. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need her to feel guilty or apologize for anything. What I needed was to let go of that anger for good. So I turned and walked away. No dramatic confrontation. No need to say anything at all. Just walking away with my head held high. That was the moment I realized I was finally free. Free of her. Free of the past. In the weeks after that, I felt something new inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at the situation, not even at myself for how long it took me to wake up. I was just at peace. Not completely healed, but on my way. And that felt like a win in itself. Kate, the woman I'd been seeing, ended things not long after that. It wasn't a big blow to me. She was a part of my healing process, but she wasn't the one I needed. I realized that what I needed wasn't someone else to fill the space my ex-wife left behind. What I needed was to rebuild that space on my own. To find the strength within myself to be whole, without relying on anyone else to complete me. Kate and I parted on good terms. No drama. No bad feelings. I think she understood that I wasn't ready for anything serious. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be ready again. Not anytime soon, at least. But I wasn't worried about it. I didn't need to rush things. One of the most freeing things I've realized through all of this is that I don't need a relationship to be happy. I don't need to justify my worth to anyone. I don't need to explain why I'm single, or why I'm not over my past, or why I'm still figuring things out. I don't need to measure my happiness by other people's standards. I'm good on my own. I'm more than good. I'm better than I've ever been. Stronger, wiser, more confident in who I am. The man I was before all this happened? He's still here. Maybe even better than he was, because he's learned from the hurt, from the mistakes, from the things he couldn't control. In the end, I didn't get revenge. I didn't get some grand cinematic closure that tied everything up in a neat little bow. But I don't need that. What I got instead is something more lasting. Peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from tearing someone down, but from letting go of the things that no longer serve you. I don't think I'll ever forget what happened. I don't think I'll ever forget how much it hurt. But the pain doesn't own me anymore. I'm the one who decides who I am now. And I'm finally starting to understand that my happiness is mine to control, not hers. So, I'm moving forward. Slowly but surely. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm not afraid of being alone. And I'm not afraid of loving again, either. When the time is right. But for now, I'm content. Because I know I'm whole, even if it took me a while to figure it out. And that's enough.